Good evening, everyone, and thanks for attending the November edition of Geosaurus Unleashed. Welcome back if you're a regular attendee to these events, and so glad to have the first-time attendees here with us, especially during St. Louis Startup Week. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mark Tagenhorst. I'm the Geospatial Program Director at T-Rex, and we hold these monthly forums that are designed to inform and connect the geospatial community in the region. I hope everyone is enjoying the content that's been provided during Startup Week, and had an opportunity earlier this week to hear the wonderful panel discussions on utilizing geospatial information in transportation and logistics. Hats off to Bronwyn Morgan, who moderated that panel. Is a great cross-section of how big industry, the military, and the startup community is focusing on geospatial in that sector. This month for Geosaurus Unleashed, I wanted to bring out a topic that's kind of near and dear to a lot of our hearts. I've had a number of conversations with startups who are either unsure on how or where to engage with big government, as well as equal conversations with government officials that are in need of innovation, but are unsure what makes sense on where to engage with the innovation community. So we're in luck this evening because we're going to address exactly that topic with experts in the field to help you navigate that golden triangle. So first off, I want to introduce Mr. Dave Mcallister. Dave is an artificial intelligence and mission analytics leader at Deloitte Consulting, a good friend of T-Rex. He previously managed an innovation software program at the Department of Defense's Strategic Capabilities Office, and was an intelligence officer in the Navy for over 29 years. First off, Dave, happy Veterans Day, and we're extremely excited that you're able to join us tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Very excited to be here.
Good. So next we have, we want to welcome Syeed Mansur. Syeed is the CEO of Sentrana Inc, a leading innovator in collaborative AI, machine learning operations technology. He's the architect of Sentrana's technology platform called DeepCortex, and engages closely with his users to maximize alignment of the technology with their user needs. Syeed's background is interesting in applied mathematics and geospatial analytics, and he previously served NGA in a geospatial as a geospatial systems architect. So before we turn it over to Syeed and Dave, BJ, is there any other protocol that we need to talk about relative to questions and answers?
No, just send any questions in the Q&A box. I'll be watching that. Syeed and Dave will be as well. I did want to give a quick shout out to Pete, who is on screen for a second, and Garth. They're not part of the panel, but they are great friends here at Deloitte. So without giving them a full intro, just everyone acknowledge their great work in helping us out here.
Yeah, well said, BJ. All right, with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you and get us started tonight.
Great, thank you, Mark. Yeah, excited to talk about this topic. As Mark said earlier, it's something that's near and dear to many of our hearts, including mine. Basically, I've been working in this space for the last 4 years in earnest. Before that, though, my next to last tour in the Navy was as the J2 at Transcom. So St. Louis, geospatial community, and working that intersection has been very, close to me since that time when I arrived there in the St. Louis area in 2014. But at SCO, I ran a software program, and as part of that program and my responsibilities as the PM, I met with companies that were startups, everything from startups to big established defense firms, that everyone would recognize. Everyone had a thing, an idea, a capability that they thought might have applicability to the SCO mission. So we were in the position of vetting that. And as I learned through that experience, and then now, since I've joined Deloitte, being on the industry side of things, bringing ideas and capabilities into government, kind of crystallized this idea of that triangle of there's the interests of industry, of government, and then what I kind of call the third side of that triangle is the contracting side of that. How do you get those industry things into government? And it's through that contracting capability that the government has. And not everyone on the government side who has a mission need or a capability need, is very attuned to the contracting side of things. And industry often doesn't know, well, which way do I go? Do I go through the contracting side because they're the ones issuing these, notices or requests for proposals? You have the client who is, ultimately kind of telling you what the requirements are. How do all those things work together? And so my hope is that tonight we'll be able to field questions from you on any specific, areas of interest or concern that you have in that triangle, and that Sid and I can kind of peel back our experiences and share with you our thoughts and ideas around those three areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Sid and let you hear from him exactly his experience and ideas around the triangle idea.
Thank you very much, Dave. And Mark, thank you indeed. It's very much a privilege and a pleasure to be here with this audience. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. Perhaps, what might help is provide a little bit of background in terms of how we were given the opportunity to become involved with NGA, maybe just a 2-minute overview on that, because we were primarily operating in the commercial space. We're an innovator that started up in the commercial sector on the whole field of computer vision, AI, and machine learning. And it just so happened that our paths crossed at NGA at a random event. The former director of NGA, Cardillo, was speaking at a Cornell University alumni event. And in this alumni event, he was expressing anxiety over the deluge of data that analysts were confronted with, and openly just put a call out to the alumni community saying that if there are good ideas of how to address this need, where there is so much information now that we need apparatus that can help us get on top of this data deluge. And it was a very emphatic call to action where it resonated very deeply with us, my colleagues in the audience. And we felt that what we had under our tool chain was the capability to get a problem like that addressed. And so the effort then became one of how do we connect the dots between who we were and the capabilities that we felt could be marshaled towards addressing this need, and individuals inside of NGA that could shepherd that innovation. And then there's a third leg to this, and this is where the Golden Triangle also comes in, is that we were very much focused on pushing the envelope of technology. NGA is very much focused on addressing a very critical, indeed vital mission need that caters to our national security interests. And then there is the element of making sure that we're not chasing pie-in-the-sky problems with pie-in-the-sky solutions, that there is a very legitimate and robust execution plan that keeps us grounded and well managed in terms of that delivery. And this is where Deloitte, who we have been working with for many years, came into the picture as well. So that's our
if I could chime in and riff off of that.
Yes.
So that risk that Sid's talking about, and from the government side, there's great concern about technical risk. Is it too ambitious? Is it executable? But also delivery and execution risk. So I think there's a couple of sides, maybe more than two sides of that risk paradigm there. And that's what I think it's important to pull apart those threads sometimes of what Sid said, the pie in the sky. Is this even something that's feasible? And sometimes it's worth taking that flyer on something that may not be proven, but wow, if it does prove out, it could be a game changer. But then there's that execution risk. How if you do prove that it works, can you deliver it and deliver it at scale maybe that the client and the government needs?
Absolutely. And just to riff off of that, what I will say, and I don't want us to get demoralized at all the risks here, but it's important to be cognizant that wherever innovation is concerned, there is an appetite for risk that has to be tolerated, but risk mitigation and risk management and risk awareness and situational awareness are very key. And so there is execution risk, there is moonshot risk, there is change management risk. In case the technology does work, the upside risk is now we want people to really harness that technology and that innovation to make an impact on how they deliver against the mission. So there's a change management risk there that needs to be addressed. And there's a process risk. If this technology that did not exist before is now becoming something that's instrumental to meeting the end needs, then it changes the process by how people do their work on a day-to-day basis. And so there is a procedural risk as well. And I think within this golden triangle, it takes all points of that triangle to really corral, manage, and mitigate these risks. And I think for the individuals in the audience that hail from the startup community, and you're looking at this large opportunity to serve your nation, to serve NGA, I think we shouldn't be gun shy, and I would encourage you to not be gun shy of vocalizing these risks. I think it'll be very much appreciated on the other side, the side that you're serving, NGA, to understand that you understand what risks you foresee, and to commission the operational managers that can help navigate those risks.
Yeah, Sid, I think that's critical because it shows realism, right? And managing expectations, right? And then the other piece of this is, there's a responsibility, I think, on the government side to write these requirements in a way that allow smalls to offer their services in a way, right, that is realistic. For example, I see so many of these broad agency announcements or OTAs where they give you like a few lines of like, we want something that applies artificial intelligence to detecting objects. And if they look so broad, I mean, then anything, looks like a hammer that can hit that nail. And that's not helpful to anybody. It certainly isn't helpful for a small that's trying to figure out how their capability might apply. So I would challenge people on the government side of this to be able to write your requirements in a specific enough way that you're offering a concrete thing to help with or solve, but that you're allowing innovative approaches to solve that problem. But you've got to define the problem so it's a concrete thing. And then conversely, when people are writing to respond to these requirements that come out, you need to be able, don't tell me that your thing does everything, including sliced bread. Tell me how it specifically meets and solves the mission problem that's been articulated. And if at all possible, tell me how you are willing to prototype it and lay out kind of that path to what a working prototype might look like and what that timeline, and then bringing in, what we just talked about, what are the potential risks, right? What are the things that are in that critical path, whether they're terms of resources or, the technology hasn't quite proven out yet. So this is a risk because it is unknown. We think it's a theoretical approach we have, but we haven't been able to prove it in the field, so to speak. Those are things that are key, I think, to making that initial connection work and getting traction for ideas and getting to find that common ground. And then the other piece of that then becomes that contracting. Do you have the right kind of contracting vehicle that allows you to bring in innovation, to prototype, to experiment, with recognizing that sometimes things will fail, right? But where's the appetite on the government side for failure? You can't do everything in a waterfall approach where you're minimizing the risk to an extent that you're never getting to delivering the capability in a fashion that's timely enough to meet, mission requirements. And I think that's kind of where the contracting world right now is in a state of flux. They recognize the need to deliver acquisition capabilities faster, and to account for these technologies that are evolving literally day by day, month by month. The state of technology is changing in such a way that we can no longer afford to enter into 3-year procurement programs. We need things that are 90 or 100-day prototyping, followed by, yeah, you have a viable, minimal product. We're going to move it into a production stage. So where are those types of vehicles and contracting approaches that allow for the people with the requirement and the people with the capabilities to meet and then, do work and get paid for it?
Dave, right on the heels of those points that you just made, I think is a very important question. And it's one that was posed by one of our attendees, Colonel Scott Heathman. And I'll just relay the question to you because I think on the very points that you made, I think you'd be well positioned to answer this question. As the commander of Scott Air Force Base, I have a couple of challenges in connecting the dots. One is we don't always do the best job showcasing the problem sets we want solved. And two, many of our military members in various units have no experience with innovation to the point of seeking contracts. And after you speak to this, I think there are a few points that I might want to say to this as well. What can I enable, speaking for Scott, Colonel Heathman here, what can I enable for the community and small business to better educate my force and pull out the potential problem sets that can be addressed? And he follows up by saying, SIBRs are a completely foreign word to many military members. Okay, all right. Go ahead, Dave. Why don't you take a crack at that, and I'll follow up with a few words as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first thought is having reverse industry days and industry days where you can just have an open dialogue about this and let those from industry, and make sure that whoever your contracting offices and arm might be for Scott Air Force Base, pull in someone from Transcom's TCAQ to start that dialogue and have the discussion so that people, don't feel that this is just a mysterious thing you can't crack or solve, but that you start a dialogue. And then finding out from industry what their capabilities are may inform the way that you ask questions or try to solicit capabilities or services that can meet your needs. And then conversely, be able to explain in simple English what your needs might be in a non-binding contracting kind of way. You don't necessarily have to issue an RFI or a formal solicitation to engage industry and figure out how industry might be able to help. But have those acquisition professionals kind of within arm's reach so they can keep everyone out of peril, right? You don't want someone to inadvertently try to enter into an agreement verbally or anything like that. Have the acquisition professionals there, and Garth, who's on the line, lived in that world when he was in the government at Transcom and TCAQ. And I think just getting all the parties together to have that initial conversation can help solve a lot of the angst around, I don't know where to go, what to do.
Yeah, most certainly. So just homing in on Colonel Heathman's last part of the question, what can I enable for the community to better educate my force and pull out the potential problems sets that can be addressed? To that particular question, I would be absolutely remiss here that if I didn't tip my hat to NGA, and particularly the program manager that brought us in and really put us on a path for success. The last 3 years have been, I think, a tremendously successful experience for both us and for NGA. And I think NGA had a big role in this. And at some point midway through our work together, our collaboration, I think the success stories were starting to emerge. And this was a question that was placed directly to Dr. Chauhan in one of the forums that NGA was hosting, where he was asked this question: what can we do as other program managers to better educate our own force to pull out the potential problem sets that can be addressed? And I will just plagiarize the answer that Dr. Chauhan from NGA put on the table. His answer was, look, we now live in an era where the innovation that is driving so much productivity gains and mission success can be traced back to AI and machine learning. And I know this is perhaps getting a very specific, but there's something here in his question that I think is important. He said, when it comes to the application of this new body of innovations that we could bring in to better impact our force, to better impact our missions, the questions that we should be asking ourselves and asking our own teams is, if you could hire a large cadre of additional human beings to help alleviate your own workload, to help alleviate your own frustrations, to help alleviate work that falls off the table, think about it in those terms. Think about it where you crave a larger labor force, you crave a larger brain force, because those are the very things that when you home in on, you'll be able to identify the problem sets that are now well positioned for being addressed through the innovations that are now emerging at lightning speed, namely in the field of AI and machine learning. So I love the fact that what Narinder did in answering that question is he brought it back to not technology, but he brought it back to human beings. And he said, where do you need more human beings? That is precisely where you ought to think about the prospects of using technology and innovation to address that need, because we are in a place where it is tough to just solve mission needs by throwing more and more and more human beings at the problem.
Yeah, Sid, and specifically to that point, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that academia can play a very big role in that part of the equation right there. And I should have said this earlier. Academia, I consider as part of that industry kind of area there. They straddle sometimes as FFRPs, between the government and industry side of things, but there's a lot of capability in academia, and even, for Colonel Heathman's question there, partnerships with local universities to help them advise and think through your problems. They're often willing to do that, contracted or non-contracted basis. So I wouldn't look past them. They're a very important resource as well. And I think they're doing some of the most groundbreaking studies on how you reimagine your workforce and how you re-engineer human capital needs based on what automation can do for your business. But that does get back to the business process reinvention, to change management. People are the hardest things in all this equation. Technology is sometimes easy. You can make a widget, you can put it to work, but getting people to use that widget or change the way their workflow goes, that's often, even if you have a great widget, sometimes it'll die because people aren't willing to change the way they do their work. So having that first and foremost in mind is often a key to success as well. I see we have another question about NGA offering open houses and events so that program managers can be present, get to know, and meet startups. Unfortunately, neither Sid nor I represent NGA. We can't commit NGA to anything, but I think Mark and BJ can take a note because we do have the relationship with T-Rex, and get that question back to them.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things they've already been leaning forward. Is if you've been watching the news this week or last week, NGA is embedding 60 some personnel in T-Rex and something called Moonshot Labs. So that'll be an opportunity for NGA to work directly in the innovation community and engage with startups and get a pulse on new technology. So that's one thing. The other thing is they'll be kicking off an accelerator program here in the very near future. So it'll give startups access to some of NGA hard problems and to be able to solve in an unclassified environment. So those are two significant events that NGA has taken over the last 6 months or so, and will be obviously beneficial to the startup community. It'll be beneficial to NGA. So we'll get more details as that emerges from NGA. But they are making a concerted effort to engage in the community. I think they've realized a few years ago that technology was moving faster than they were, and their best bet was to lean forward and get embedded and understand the culture and adopt some of that culture within their organization. One comment I want to make based on some of the previous questions. So when I was on the NGA side, I was always confident that we could come up or develop technology with some of our partners to solve a problem that we had. The long pole in the tent for me was always the transition of that technology into a classified environment that was totally risk averse for all the right reasons. So whether it's Transcom or NGA or any other intelligence community or DoD organization, one of the big problems is the transition of that technology, right? So we've worked with partners and we've developed phenomenal things, and for either it was too long of a time frame to get it into the hands of the analysts because of all the restrictions that you have and the regression testing and all of the steps that you need to make sure that there are no disruption to the systems because they are, mission oriented. That was always the long pole in the tent. And I would say part of that was on the side of the government, not clearly articulating what the insertion environment would be. And it was actually, I mentioned in this, Dave, because back to one of your original points, how the government needs to do kind of a better job of discussing not only the hard problems with the architectural framework that they'll
and what the requirements are, right, on that side, especially in the classified space. And a couple of comments on that. So I am seeing progress on the government side with the thinking around DevSecOps and continuous integration, continuous delivery for technology, software related requirements. And at the end of the day, ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Algorithm development, AI, ML pipelines, those kinds of things. Sid and I have been involved in solutioning and architecting for multiple proposals over the last year. And that's always a real consideration, right? The valley of death, getting over the hump. Even if we prove the prototype works, is the government ready, willing? One, do they have funding? Two, do they have the technology environment that will allow us to come in and bring new things? So, but I am encouraged by the fact that there's a recognition. So you have Platform One, Cloud One, in the Air Force, making great strides to kind of cracking that nut and proving it will work out. I hope the IC benefits and learns and starts moving in that direction where they're truly thinking about that DevSecOps implication. But what Smalls, I think, can do to help themselves is if you're not able to handle all of the complexity that would be required, think about teaming with a big, someone who is capable of, has the software engineers and the cybersecurity people who can help you get through the whatever RMF or ATO framework is required, but more importantly, do the systems integration testing, right? That's very necessary so that mission critical systems aren't negatively impacted with the second, third order effects that weren't foreseen. We're going to have that kind of testing. The government can't do it because there aren't enough qualified people in the government to do it. It's something that has to be done by industry. And often the only way it's going to be a team of companies coming together to solve that problem.
Dave, I think that from my perspective as a small, I can say this without much shame. I can say that as a startup, we oftentimes become very enamored with our own technology and our own innovation. And it's almost as if there's a sense of innovating just for the sake of innovating. And to add further to why it's important to team with a big and the value that a big could bring to the table, I think there's one other thing that you do, and you do it, I think, so subconsciously and diligently that you didn't mention it, because I think you might be somewhat even, it's just become second nature. But as a systems integrator, what you're looking to do is not innovation for the sake of innovation, but innovation for the sake of mission impact. And so you've got that lens on, and that lens is, look, this is a shiny object, but do we really need a shiny object right here in this problem sphere? And so that problem first focus and the path to meeting that problem with the least risk and highest ROI, return on investment, possible is I think the path that you provide to a small, so that we don't get carried away being so in love with our technology that it might not actually deliver mission impact. And I think that is a tremendous value for a small and a tremendous incentive for a small to really hook up with a big, because oftentimes even customers themselves can become so enamored with the technology because it is a shiny new object. Who doesn't like something that's sexy, right? But I think there is a risk of losing sight of what is the mission impact that we hope to achieve here. So I want to put that on the table, encourage the smalls to think about your customer not only as a partner, but a big as a partner as well, because it is indeed going to take this bilateral set of partnerships to ensure that the technology that you are so excited about actually is operationally impactful.
Yeah, good. Hey, so I don't see any open questions in the Q&A. So I have one. Just so of course when I came over to T-Rex about 15 or 16 months ago, didn't really understand the startup world and in some of the challenges they were facing. So I have a question for you, Sid, actually. So if I'm a startup and I'm working on a specific technology, are there so the investment that comes in to support your startup, are they encouraging you or discouraging you or neither towards working towards big government? Because I ask that because of the time frame that it typically takes to to get something in place with the U.S. government.
So, so Mark, let me just clarify. Is the question, are we being encouraged by potential government sponsors to go after government contracts? Is that the question?
The basic question is the investors that are working with you, do they encourage you to go towards commercial avenues to get things to market quick, or are they patient enough for you to go to work a big government contract?
I think speaking on behalf of what we've experienced as an organization and what some of my other colleagues in other startups have experienced with the investor community, investors are very diverse. They're very heterogeneous. They have different objectives, all of them. But there is one common thread, and that common thread is they want to make sure that the technology that you're building is technology that, and the innovation that you're hatching is an innovation that will gain traction, that you have not just fallen in love with your own research, but it is going to be impactful for whoever is going to use it, whether it is the government who might acquire it at a slower pace than commercial, who might acquire it very rapidly. They want to see that traction, and they want to see a path towards traction. And whether the government signs the contract saying this has now become a program of record is secondary to whether or not there are users in the government that will at least speak up and say, this will address a problem that we have. If we ultimately acquire it over 2 years, so be it, but it is something that is quintessential to us being able to move the needle forward on national security issues or on healthcare issues like over at the VA or what have you. So I don't think startups should be fearful of chasing down a government orientation. Look, Silicon Valley was born from just the incredible amount of defense-driven innovation that was sparked out of the aerospace industry back in the 1960s and 1970s. Fairchild Semiconductor, the forerunner to Intel Corporation, it was building chips that were going to guided missiles.
Louis Shepard teaches a course about that at George Mason and teaches that it's fascinating.
And I would encourage folks to, I have not taken that course, but just on the the surface, it is absolutely fascinating, and it is also at the same time, I think, um, discouraging. I think when there is an assumption that is made by investors or by startup executives themselves, thinking that the government is not a place to go to thrive and succeed and expand the innovation envelope and indeed expand your business. I think it is incredibly fertile ground, and I think NGA gave us a tremendous springboard from which to continue innovating and even expand further into commercial interests.
Yeah, thanks, appreciate that.
So we do have a couple of questions. First one up here is, would the government want to buy the startup if it's successful? The government is likely not going to acquire a company. They may pay a company to develop technology that under the contract terms would be the intellectual property of the government and belong to the government. So that's one avenue for the government to acquire whatever the thing or capability. But if it's a really successful approach or capability, it's much more likely that a small would be bought by a bigger company and acquired that way. Deloitte does that all the time. We, see things that are best of breed, market-leading capabilities, and we'll work out an arrangement to buy the company.
And in fact, I will say, going one step further, not only will the government not want to buy the startup, but the technology that the startup is bringing to the table, oftentimes the government is going to think twice about buying the technology because they don't want to have to own, operate, maintain technology. And so it is very much a technology and human expert combined play. And so that's something to keep in mind. We ourselves, as a technology purveyor, have really come to understand and appreciate how critical it is for us as the human beings behind the technology to be at the service of the government users and the government programs so that they can get the most out of the technology. And oftentimes it is us as the human actors on the stage that are more important than the technology itself. So I would just encourage the startup managers that are in the audience to keep that perspective in mind.
Okay, any other?
Yeah, Mark.
So Mark, there's a question to you. Any
question.
updates on T-Rex? Last webinar, you mentioned something about a data warehouse, data lake as a test bid. What is that about?
Yeah, so I did mention it. We've partnered with Amazon Web Services. So when I came in as the program director for the Geospatial Innovation Center at T-Rex, one of the thoughts that I had was to create a data lake or a data environment, warehouse, whatever you want to call it, that allows the tenants, the partners at the Geospatial Innovation Center to have access to data formats that either they didn't know about or they couldn't afford to continue their development. So that has always been a focus of mine since I've come on. Recently, I mentioned that Amazon Web Services came in as a corporate sponsor, a partner to, and they're going to provide that. We're still working out the details on how we populate that that environment, how we control access. So it is going to it's going to come to fruition. We're just still at the earliest working out the details of that. So stay tuned. As soon as we get that in place with Amazon, we'll announce that publicly.
Mark, another question. Will there be more space for startups to rent?
Absolutely.
Coming up?
Absolutely. We have, so we're at 100% occupancy in our office space, but co-working space is available. We've pleasantly been surprised that some of our startups have been trickling back in. So we're getting more and more density in the spaces. So of course, we have all of our protocols in place to follow the city guidelines. So it's a big enough space to spread people out. We also just, if you've been tracking the geospatial ecosystem here, you'll know that Arch grants for the first time gave out 50,000 equity-free grants for geospatial companies. They just awarded those, and 2 of those companies have already moved in to Geospatial Innovation Center. Yes, they do. We do have lockable drawer units in our co-working space. So anyway, it's going to be a fantastic environment. And so in this collaborative space, we intentionally designed it to bring together industry, academia, government, military, and our startup community. This is all about fostering these startups to grow, to mature them so that they can graduate from T-Rex. We don't want to keep you forever. We want you to be successful and graduate and provide economic vitality for the community. So, when we talk about giving resources to the startups, we're talking about mentoring, we're talking about data, software, expertise, hard problems for you to work on. Those are all the things that we're trying to create and have created with this environment. I hope that answers your question.
Dave, here's a question for you. What areas are Deloitte recruiting for NGA or the STL area?
I saw that. So I don't have specific insight to what Deloitte's recruiting for, but we do have a great public-facing website where you can search for jobs and you can filter by geographic area, job title, key skills, etc. That really is the best way to find out what Deloitte is hiring for.
Dave, since it's Startup Week in St. Louis right now, I also have a question for you to follow up on that question, which is that oftentimes I think as a startup working with a big government customer, what we have experienced in some situations is there's a tendency for the customer, you used the word requirements before, that when requirements are spec'd out, it's not just requirements that are delineated in terms of what is the problem that needs to be solved, but what creeps into those requirements is a how, a prescription of this is how we want you to solve the problem.
Yep.
Now, Deloitte also, as a big and as the systems integrator, carries a burden or a responsibility to really foster innovation by not prescribing. So can you help shed some light on this as a big? What do you do to make sure that a small working with the government via a big does not fall into the trap of just catering to prescriptions, but really delivering to instead focused on delivering to problems?
Yeah, that is a tremendous problem, Sid, with the way government requirements are written. And there are a lot of reasons that the acquisition system, developed the way that it did, with very prescriptive, ironclad contracts, wanting lawyers involved. Everything, has to be prescribed down to specific performance standards and timetable, which doesn't very well mesh with this world that we're living in with technology, and particularly software development and AI ML development, which is very fast moving and exploratory in nature. So what we do at Deloitte is we try to become that trusted advisor for our clients on the government side, and inform and educate and and influence the thinking and the approaches about these cutting edge technology areas. And if clients will listen, we try to inform them on how requirements can be written, so that you don't prescribe, but instead enable, innovative approaches. And ultimately, it's that client relationship and whether they listen and trust that you know what you're talking about, and they have the flexibility. And Garth is having had the contract background is typing in a note here, I think, to the panelists, so I don't think the audience can see it, but making contracts outcome based is very key in that. So instead of prescribing what the deliverables are, describing the outcomes that are desired and required, and then let people figure out how to meet those outcomes. So that's the nature of it. You know, it's people-based at the end of the day, right? Because people write government requirements and government contracts. So you have to influence the thinking of the people. And so it becomes that relationship that you have, the client intimacy, and being able to matchmake, if you will, right? Because we know, hey, we know this startup is working on something we think that the government may be very interested in. Let's come in and do a demo for you and explain. That's the other piece of this. Too many times I see, you know, both when I was wearing the government hat and now, you know, being on the other side of it, people come into these conversations with a PowerPoint deck, right? Things on paper, right? It's PowerPoint deep. It's a great idea, but it's PowerPoint. If it's software, if there is any way possible to develop a working demo, and I recognize that trying to crack into the geospatial side of this with the IC, it's very difficult, right? Because you want to really get to the classified context of problems and be able to work in the classified area. But is that chicken and the egg? You often can't jump straight into that. You have to prove on an unclassed way, right, that something has viability, that the technology is real. If at all possible, we need to have a software prototype or a possibility, and is not just PowerPoint deep, but is actual real working code that can grab attention, can show the viability right up front. So we try to get to where we have that perfect situation where clients got a need, we're able to bring a capability and show it working in a manner that is real, believable, that makes it tangible. But that's sometimes very difficult to do.
You know, Colonel Heathman has a fantastic question, and I want to get to it.
Let's make this
we have just a few minutes
last
left.
one, so that I give you guys back some of your evening, if you don't mind.
Yep. So, so his question is, we have a software development team called Conjure that was just given the software factory designation within the software ecosystem in the Air Force. The military does not have a true app store where it can park the tools and software that it has developed, where it can be used and repurposed for other missions. And as a result, it doesn't create more room for development. And the question from Colonel Heathman is, what are our thoughts on how the government could off-ramp long-term sustainment of software that's developed internally? I could take a quick stab at that, Dave, and I think you probably also have some thoughts. I think this is where we can look to the commercial sector, because what we see within large innovative enterprises, and large enterprises do innovate. JP Morgan, Microsoft, on Wall Street, we see tremendous innovation within the bio. They're always innovating, and they have to make room for new development efforts, and existing tools and software need to find a home from where they can be reused, repurposed, recomposed to something else. And now what's happening is they are not necessarily just creating their own app stores, but a lot of the software that is now being created is software that is modularized. And so what you have is really modularized, recomposable software that gets set up as APIs. And so we live in an API world. We live in a modular world. And it is critical that if you're going to put software on the shelf so that it could be reused, that you think about how to wrap that piece of software within an API and stick it into an API repository. And the cloud has become tremendous for this, either using the secure cloud, C2S, or the public cloud, AWS. And that is my response to a very complex question.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines, Sid, that, you know, it's the commercial side really that's going to offer the capacity and capability to sustain that kind of software development. And the services have to think about this, DoD writ large, in, you know, marketplace as a service, DevSecOps as a service kind of thinking about software modernization and sustainment. For example, the Army's Enterprise Cloud Management Office just came out with an RFI centered around create their platform where they're going to provide the tooling for the Army's DevSecOps internal software teams, right, that want the environment and the tools that allow them to code and develop apps and capability. But the end piece of that is, right, okay, you built something great. Where does it go for sustainment? So maybe there is a sustainment as a service kind of concept that could be contracted out. It would be, I think, something that many companies would be interested in and bid on. And as Sid said, if you containerize things, if you have an API first type of approach, serverless architecture, loosely, coupled types of software principles that are driving all of your innovation and the products that you spit out the back end, it's something that many in the commercial side would be very qualified to do and capable of doing. Hopefully that helps answer the question, Colonel Heath.
I would encourage Colonel Heathman to reach out to either Dave or myself. This is a really important question, and there are very compelling and robust answers to this question. But I think in this short time span that we have, we can't really entertain it and give it its full. And
having worked for Will Roper, who was my boss when I was at SCO and is now the Air Force's acquisition executive, I would be very shocked if Will Roper hasn't thought about that very specific angle and doesn't have someone working somewhere up at the headquarters Air Force level on something along those lines. But I don't know for a fact. But I would be shocked if he hadn't, because he's the kind of guy that thinks about these kinds of angles and already has something in work.
Hey, great. I appreciate it. Dave, Sid, I appreciate you guys taking out the time of your busy schedules to spend an evening with us in the geospatial community here in the region. I just loved the discussion. Could go on all night, but you got to have a life too. So thanks again for this. We really appreciate that. Peter, Garth, thanks for doing the coordination and setting this up for Deloitte. And BJ, thanks for creating a technical environment that worked out flawlessly for everyone. If you have any follow-up questions for Dave or Sid or myself, please send them to me or BJ. We'll make sure we answer those as quick as we can. So thanks again for everyone who took time out of their evening to spend with us at Geosaurus Unleashed, and we look forward to seeing you again in December. Thanks.
Hey, thank you all.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.